The letter arrived on a grey October morning, carried by a footman whose black livery bore the unmistakable crest of the Duke of Thornbridge. Lady Helena Whitford stared at the heavy parchment with trembling fingers, knowing before she broke the seal that her life was about to change irrevocably. Her guardian's voice echoed in her memory from their conversation the previous evening. "The Duke of Thornbridge requires a wife, Helena. His condition complicates matters, but the arrangement serves both families well." The Duke of Thornbridge. Even the name sent a chill through her. Everyone in England knew the tragic story, how the powerful Duke had fallen into a mysterious sleep 3 months ago after a riding accident, how the finest physicians in London had declared his condition hopeless, how his vast estate now hung in limbo while he lay unconscious in his ancestral home. And now somehow, she was to become his wife. Helena unfolded the letter with careful precision, her green eyes scanning the formal script. "Lady Whitford, as discussed with your guardian, the arrangements for your marriage to His Grace, the Duke of Thornbridge, have been finalized. The ceremony will take place this coming Saturday at Thornbridge Castle. Given the unique circumstances, the wedding will be conducted privately with only essential witnesses present. Your presence is required at the castle by Friday evening. A carriage will be sent for you. Respectfully, the Thornbridge solicitor Helena set the letter aside and moved to the window of her modest chamber, gazing out at the rolling countryside that had been her home for the past 5 years since her parents' death. At 23, she had resigned herself to spinsterhood, her lack of dowry and her guardian's mounting debts having effectively removed her from the marriage market. But this was something else entirely. "Miss Helena," her lady's maid entered quietly, concern evident in her weathered face. "You've gone quite pale, miss. Is it bad news?" "I'm to be married," Helena said, her voice sounding strange even to her own ears. "To the Duke of Thornbridge?" The maid's eyes widened in shock. "But miss, isn't he—" "In a coma, yes." Helena turned from the window, her expression resolute despite the uncertainty churning in her stomach. "It seems my guardian has arranged a rather unusual union." The truth was more complex than Helena cared to admit, even to herself. Her guardian's gambling debts had reached catastrophic proportions, and the Thornbridge family's offer had been impossible to refuse, a substantial sum in exchange for a bride who could fulfill a crucial clause in the Duke's inheritance. Without a wife, the vast Thornbridge holdings would pass to a distant cousin, leaving the Duke's young daughter from his first marriage with nothing. It was, Helena realized, a marriage designed to protect a child she had never met, to preserve a legacy for a man who might never wake to appreciate it. "We must pack immediately," she told her maid with forced calm. "I leave for Thornbridge Castle tomorrow." The Castle of Shadows. Thornbridge Castle loomed against the darkening sky like something from a Gothic novel, its ancient towers and battlements silhouetted against storm clouds that seemed perpetually gathered over the Yorkshire moors. As Helena's carriage wound up the long drive, she caught glimpses of the estate through the rain-streaked windows. Vast parklands, ornamental lakes, and gardens that spoke of centuries of wealth and power. But there was something melancholy about the place, as though the very stones mourned their sleeping master. "Impressive, isn't it?" said the elderly woman who had accompanied Helena on the journey, the Duke's aunt, who served as chaperone and had maintained a stony silence for most of the trip. "Alexander's ancestors built it to last through the ages. One can only hope he will wake to see it continue." Helena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The reality of what she was about to do seemed to grow more surreal with each passing mile. The carriage drew to a halt before the main entrance, where a small army of servants waited despite the late hour. Helena was helped down by a footman, whose expression was carefully neutral, though she caught glimpses of curiosity in the eyes of the assembled staff. "Welcome to Thornbridge Castle, my lady," said the butler, a dignified man whose bearing spoke of decades of service to the family. "I am the head butler. His Grace's solicitor is waiting to speak with you, and the housekeeper will show you to your chambers when you're ready." The great hall was magnificent, soaring ceilings, ancient tapestries, and a massive fireplace that cast dancing shadows across stone walls. But Helena barely noticed the grandeur. Her attention was fixed on the portraits lining the walls, particularly one that dominated the space above the fireplace. It showed a man in his early 30s with dark hair and penetrating blue eyes, dressed in the formal attire of his rank. His face was aristocratic, but not cold, intelligent, but not harsh. There was something compelling about his expression, as though he possessed secrets worth discovering. That was painted 2 years ago, the aunt said, following Helena's gaze. Before his first wife died, before everything changed. He looks, Helena paused, searching for the right word. Alive. He was then. Alexander was known for his wit, his passion for reform, his dedication to his estate and his people. The accident, it silenced all of that. A door opened at the far end of the hall, and a thin man in dark clothing approached them with measured steps. Lady Whitford, I presume. I am the family solicitor. If you would join me in the study, there are documents to review before tomorrow's ceremony. The next hour passed in a blur of legal terminology and formal arrangements. Helena signed papers that made her head spin: settlements, inheritance clauses, provisions for the Duke's 7-year-old daughter from his first marriage. Through it all, one fact remained starkly clear. She was entering a marriage that existed only on paper, to a man who might never acknowledge her existence. There is one final matter, the solicitor said as they concluded their business. His Grace's condition. The physicians have declared it hopeless, but he remains present in a sense. His body functions normally. He breathes without assistance. His heart beats steadily. He simply sleeps. May I see him? The question escaped Helena before she could stop herself. The solicitor exchanged a glance with the aunt. It is unusual but not forbidden. Perhaps it would be wise for you to understand the full nature of your situation. They led her through corridors lined with family portraits and ancient armor, up a grand staircase, and finally to a set of double doors guarded by a footman. The aunt knocked softly before entering. "Alexander," she said to the still figure on the bed, her voice gentle despite the apparent futility of the gesture. "Your bride has arrived, Lady Helena Whitford." Helena stepped into the chamber and felt her breath catch. The Duke lay in a massive 4-poster bed, looking for all the world as though he had simply fallen asleep while reading. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his face peaceful but pale. He was dressed in a fine nightshirt, and his hands rested atop the coverlet with an elegance that spoke of his aristocratic breeding. But it was his face that captured her attention. Even in sleep, he was undeniably handsome. Strong features, a well-defined jaw, and those dark lashes that any woman would envy. There was something almost ethereal about him, as though he existed in a realm between life and death. "The physicians say he shows no signs of awareness," the aunt whispered. "But sometimes I think I see his eyes move beneath his lids, as though he's dreaming." Helena moved closer to the bed, drawn by an impulse she couldn't name. "How long has he been like this?" 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days, came a small voice from the doorway. Helena turned to see a young girl with dark hair and solemn blue eyes, clearly the Duke's daughter. She was dressed in a simple black dress that emphasized her pallor and the shadows beneath her eyes. "This is Lady Isabella," the aunt said softly, "Alexander's daughter." The child approached the bed with the careful movements of someone who had spent too much time in sick rooms. "I read to him every day," she said matter-of-factly. "The physicians say he can't hear me, but I think they're wrong. Sometimes his breathing changes when I read his favorite passages." Helena's heart clenched at the sight of this brave little girl maintaining vigil over her sleeping father. "What do you read to him?" "Poetry, mostly. He loves Wordsworth and Byron, and sometimes I tell him about my lessons, or what's happening in the village." Isabella looked up at Helena with eyes that seemed far too old for her years. "Are you really going to marry him tomorrow?" "Yes," Helena said simply, because there seemed no point in elaborate explanations to a child who had already endured too much. "Good," Isabella said with surprising firmness. "He needs someone to take care of him, and I need someone to help me take care of him." The simple honesty of the statement nearly brought tears to Helena's eyes. This child had been carrying an impossible burden, trying to will her father back to consciousness through sheer devotion. "I'll do my best," Helena promised, and meant it. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Helena found herself looking back at the sleeping Duke. In the candlelight, he looked almost mythical, a sleeping prince waiting for some magic to restore him to life. If only such things existed outside of fairy tales. The wedding of Lady Helena Whitford to His Grace, the Duke of Thornbridge, was unlike any ceremony in the long history of English aristocracy. It took place in the castle's private chapel, a small but exquisite space with stained glass windows that cast jeweled light across ancient stone walls. The guest list was minimal by necessity: the family solicitor, the Duke's aunt, young Isabella, the local vicar who had agreed to perform the unusual ceremony, and a handful of essential witnesses. Helena wore a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk, her auburn hair arranged in a classic style that emphasized the delicate beauty of her features. But the groom, the Duke, had been carefully dressed in his finest formal attire and positioned in a specially constructed chair that allowed him to remain upright during the ceremony. His valet had arranged his dark hair and ensured his appearance was impeccable, but nothing could disguise the fact that he was utterly unconscious, his head supported by a discreet cushion, his eyes closed in perpetual sleep. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began, his voice echoing strangely in the small space, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Alexander James Thornbridge, Duke of Thornbridge, and Helena Margaret Whitford in the bonds of holy matrimony." Helena stood beside her unconscious groom, her hands clasped tightly to prevent them from trembling. The surreal nature of the situation threatened to overwhelm her. She was marrying a man who couldn't speak his vows, couldn't acknowledge her presence, couldn't even stand without assistance. The vicar had modified the traditional ceremony to accommodate the circumstances. When it came time for the Duke's responses, the solicitor spoke on his behalf, citing legal precedent and medical documentation that allowed for such arrangements in cases of incapacitation. "Do you, Helena Margaret Whitford, take Alexander James Thornbridge to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Helena looked at the sleeping man beside her, this stranger who was about to become her husband. His face was peaceful, almost serene, and she found herself wondering what he had been like before the accident. What made him laugh? What were his dreams, his fears, his hopes for the future? "I do," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. The ring ceremony was perhaps the most poignant moment. Helena had to lift the Duke's unconscious hand, slide the wedding band onto his finger, and then allow him to place, with the vicar's assistance, a beautiful sapphire ring on hers. His hand was warm, she noticed with surprise, and his fingers were long and elegant, the hands of a gentleman who had never known manual labor. "By the power vested in me by the Church of England, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the vicar concluded. "You may, that is," he faltered, clearly uncertain how to handle the traditional conclusion of the ceremony. How did one instruct a bride to kiss a groom who couldn't participate? Helena looked at her new husband, this sleeping stranger who was now legally bound to her for life. An impulse seized her, perhaps born of compassion, perhaps of some deeper instinct she couldn't name. "May I?" she asked the vicar softly. He nodded, though his expression remained uncertain. Helena leaned down toward the Duke, her heart pounding with an intensity that surprised her. This close, she could see the individual dark lashes that framed his closed eyes, could detect the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to his skin. His lips were well-shaped, neither too full nor too thin, and there was something almost inviting about them despite his unconscious state. She pressed her lips to his in what was meant to be a brief, ceremonial kiss, a gesture to complete the ritual, nothing more. But the moment their lips touched, something extraordinary happened. A spark seemed to pass between them, a jolt of electricity that made Helena gasp against his mouth. The Duke's lips, which had been cool and unresponsive, suddenly warmed beneath hers. She felt rather than saw his sharp intake of breath, felt the subtle shift in his body, as though he were emerging from the depths of a deep dream. And then, impossibly, miraculously, his eyes opened. They were blue, the deepest, most startling blue Helena had ever seen, and they were looking directly at her with an expression of confusion and wonder. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they stared at each other, her lips still touching his, both of them frozen in shock. "What?" the Duke whispered, his voice hoarse from months of disuse. "What is happening?" The chapel erupted in chaos. Isabella screamed with joy and rushed toward her father. The aunt collapsed into her chair with a cry of thanksgiving. The vicar began muttering prayers in Latin, while the solicitor stood gaping like a man who had just witnessed the impossible. But Helena remained frozen, staring into those blue eyes that held hers with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see into her very soul. "Who are you?" the Duke asked, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm—" Helena straightened slowly, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and something else she couldn't identify. "I'm your wife." Alexander Thornbridge, Duke of Thornbridge, sat up slowly in his chair, his movements careful but deliberate. His gaze never left Helena's face as he processed her words, the wedding attire, the chapel setting, the assembled witnesses. "My wife," he repeated, as though testing the words. "And you woke me with a kiss." "Papa!" Isabella reached him then, throwing her small arms around his neck with desperate relief. "Papa, you're awake. You're really awake." Alexander's attention shifted to his daughter, and Helena saw his face transform with love and concern. "Isabella, my darling girl, how long have I been asleep?" 3 months, 2 weeks and 4 days, Isabella said through her tears. "But you're awake now. Lady Helena's kiss woke you up, just like in the fairy tales." Alexander's eyes returned to Helena, and she saw a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and something deeper, a spark of interest that made her pulse quicken. "Lady Helena," he said, and her name sounded different on his lips than it ever had before. "It seems I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You owe me nothing, Your Grace," Helena replied, though her voice was not entirely steady. "I only did what anyone would have done." "No," he said, struggling to stand with Isabella's help. "Not anyone. You married a man in a coma, a stranger who could offer you nothing, and somehow you brought me back." As the chaos in the chapel gradually subsided and the reality of the miracle settled over them all, Helena found herself wondering what she had gotten herself into. She had expected to marry a sleeping man and live a quiet life as a duchess in name only. Instead, she had awakened a duke, whose piercing blue eyes seemed to see straight through her, whose very presence filled the room with an energy that made her pulse race. Her marriage of convenience had just become something far more complicated and far more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. The awakening. The hours following the Duke's miraculous awakening passed in a whirlwind of activity. Physicians were summoned from London, arriving in a flurry of black bags and grave expressions, only to stand amazed as they examined a patient who by all rights should still be unconscious. The Duke's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. His vital signs were strong, his mental faculties appeared intact, and aside from the expected weakness from months of inactivity, he showed no ill effects from his prolonged sleep. "Medically speaking, it's impossible," the lead physician confided to Helena as they stood in the corridor outside the Duke's chambers. "I've seen cases of prolonged unconsciousness before, but never a recovery so sudden and complete. What exactly happened during the ceremony?" Helena felt her cheeks warm as she recalled that moment of connection, the spark that had passed between them when their lips met. "I kissed him," she said simply. "It was meant to complete the wedding ceremony, nothing more." "Remarkable," the physician murmured, making notes in his journal. "There are documented cases of patients responding to familiar voices or touches, but this suggests something far more profound." Helena excused herself from the medical discussions and made her way to the library, seeking a moment of solitude to process the extraordinary turn her life had taken. She had awakened that morning expecting to become a widow before she was truly a wife. Instead, she found herself married to a man who was very much alive, very much aware, and whose intense blue eyes seemed to follow her every movement. "Lady Helena?" She turned to find Isabella in the doorway, her small face glowing with happiness for the first time since Helena had met her. "Isabella, sweetheart, how is your father? The physicians are examining him, but he says he feels wonderful." The child moved closer, her expression growing serious. "Lady Helena, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you going to stay? Now that Papa is awake, I mean. You don't have to pretend to be married to him anymore." The innocent question struck Helena like a physical blow. In all the excitement of the Duke's recovery, she hadn't considered the implications for their marriage. The union had been arranged to protect Isabella's inheritance and fulfill a legal requirement. Now that the Duke was conscious, did he even want a wife he had never chosen? I don't know, Isabella. That's something your father and I will need to discuss." "I hope you stay," Isabella said with the directness of childhood. "Papa needs someone to take care of him, and I like you. You have kind eyes." Before Helena could respond, a knock at the library door announced the arrival of a footman. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but His Grace requests your presence in his study at your earliest convenience." Helena's heart skipped at being addressed as Your Grace, a reminder that whatever the circumstances, she was now legally the Duchess of Thornbridge. "Tell His Grace I'll be there presently." She found the Duke in his study, a magnificent room lined with leather-bound books and dominated by a massive desk that spoke of generations of ducal authority. He had changed from his wedding attire into more comfortable clothing, dark trousers and a white shirt open at the collar, and the casual dress somehow made him seem more approachable, more human. He was standing by the window, gazing out at the estate grounds, but turned when she entered. The movement was fluid, natural, showing no signs of the weakness one might expect after months of unconsciousness. "Helena," he said, and again her name sounded different on his lips, warmer, more intimate than formal address required. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." She took the chair he indicated, acutely aware of his presence as he moved to sit behind his desk. This close, she could see that his recovery was indeed remarkable. His color was good, his eyes clear and alert, his movements confident. "First," he said, "I must thank you. My solicitor has explained the circumstances of our marriage, how you agreed to wed a man in a coma to protect Isabella's inheritance. That was extraordinarily generous. It was a business arrangement, Your Grace. You needn't feel indebted." "Alexander," he corrected gently, "we are married after all, and I think we've moved beyond formality, don't you?" Helena felt her pulse quicken at the intimacy his words implied. "Alexander, then. Though I should point out that our marriage was arranged under very specific circumstances. Now that you've recovered, you may wish to reconsider the arrangement." Something flickered in his blue eyes, surprise perhaps, or disappointment. "Do you wish to reconsider it?" The question caught her off guard. Did she? This morning she had resigned herself to a marriage in name only, to a quiet life, caring for a man who would never know she existed. Now she faced the possibility of a real marriage to a man whose very presence made her heart race. I don't know," she admitted honestly. "This morning I married a stranger. Tonight I find myself wed to a man I've never spoken to, never shared a meal with, never known in any meaningful way." "Then perhaps we should remedy that," Alexander said, rising from his chair. "Would you join me for dinner? It seems we have a great deal to learn about each other." "You should rest," Helena protested. "You've been unconscious for months. Surely you need time to recover." "On the contrary, I feel remarkably well, better than I have longer than I care to admit." He moved around the desk to stand before her, and Helena caught that faint scent of sandalwood again. "Besides, I find myself curious about the woman who agreed to marry a sleeping man. What manner of person does such a thing?" Helena rose as well, bringing them face to face. He was taller than she had realized, and standing this close, she could see flecks of silver in his blue eyes, could observe the strong line of his jaw and the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. "A desperate one," she said with more honesty than wisdom. "My guardian's debts left me with few options." "Ah," Alexander said softly. "So you sacrificed yourself for financial security? How very practical." There was something in his tone that made Helena look at him more closely. "You sound as though you disapprove." "Not disapprove, but I find myself hoping that practical considerations weren't your only motivation." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering directly, Alexander reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers warm against her skin. "When you kissed me in the chapel, Helena, there was something there. Something that went beyond duty or obligation. I felt it, even in the depths of whatever darkness held me. Did you feel it too?" Helena's breath caught at his touch, at the intensity in his voice. She had felt it, that spark, that moment of connection that had seemed to bridge the gap between his unconscious state and the waking world. But admitting it felt dangerous, like stepping onto uncertain ground. Yes, she whispered. "I felt something." "Then perhaps," Alexander said, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone, "we should explore what that something might become." Before Helena could respond, he leaned down and kissed her again. Not the desperate, ceremonial kiss of the wedding, but something softer, more deliberate. His lips moved against hers with a gentleness that belied the intensity in his eyes, and Helena found herself responding without conscious thought, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "Dinner," Alexander said, his voice rougher than before. We should have dinner and talk, get to know each other properly." "Yes," Helena agreed, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "That would be sensible." But as they stood there in the lamplight of his study, neither of them moved to leave. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with the promise of something neither had expected when they entered into their marriage of convenience. Helena realized with a mixture of excitement and terror that she was no longer married to a sleeping stranger. She was married to a man who was very much awake, very much aware, and whose kiss had awakened something in her that she hadn't known existed. The question now was whether she had the courage to explore where that awakening might lead. Dinner and discoveries. The dining room at Thornbridge Castle was a testament to centuries of aristocratic refinement. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished mahogany, while family portraits gazed down from silk-covered walls. But despite the grandeur of their surroundings, Helena found herself focused entirely on the man seated across from her. Alexander had insisted on a private dinner, just the two of them, served in the smaller family dining room rather than the formal stateroom that could seat 40. Even so, the table felt vast between them, and Helena was acutely aware of every glance, every gesture, every inflection in his voice. "Tell me about yourself," Alexander said, as the first course was served. "My solicitor provided the basic facts, but I find myself curious about the woman behind the arrangement." Helena set down her wine glass, considering how much to reveal. "There isn't much to tell, I'm afraid. I'm the daughter of a country vicar, orphaned 5 years ago, and placed under the guardianship of my father's cousin. I've lived quietly, managing his household and caring for his children. And your guardian arranged this marriage to settle his debts." It wasn't a question, but Helena nodded anyway. He owed a considerable sum to various creditors. The marriage settlement was substantial enough to resolve his difficulties. "Leaving you to marry a stranger in a coma." Alexander's voice carried a note of anger that surprised her. "Did he give you any choice in the matter?" "Choice is a luxury I could not afford," Helena said simply. "The alternative was destitution and possibly debtor's prison for my guardian. At least this way, his children are provided for." Alexander was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You speak of it so matter-of-factly. Weren't you afraid?" "Terrified," Helena admitted with a rueful smile. "I had no idea what I was walking into. A castle full of strangers, a husband who might never wake, a stepdaughter I'd never met. It seemed like something from a Gothic novel. And now? Are you still terrified?" Helena considered the question as she met his gaze. "Yes," she said honestly, "but for entirely different reasons." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that I married one man and find myself wed to another entirely. The Duke I expected was unconscious, safe, unable to complicate my life with his presence. You are none of those things." Alexander leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I complicate your life?" "Enormously." Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but pressed on. "I had prepared myself for a marriage of duty and convenience. I hadn't prepared myself for a husband who looks at me the way you do, who kisses me and makes me feel things I've never felt before, who asks questions that require honest answers." The admission hung between them, more intimate than Helena had intended. Alexander set down his fork and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Helena, I want you to know something. This marriage may have begun as a legal necessity, but it doesn't have to remain one. If you choose to stay, truly choose, not because you feel obligated, then I would like to try to build something real between us. And if I choose to leave, then I will provide you with a generous settlement and ensure your independence. You will never want for anything, and you will be free to live your life as you see fit." Helena stared at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "You would do that, even though our marriage protects Isabella's inheritance. Isabella's inheritance is secure regardless. The marriage has been performed and legally recorded. Whether you remain as my wife is entirely your choice." "Why?" Helena asked softly. "Why give me that choice? Most men in your position would simply expect compliance." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his wineglass. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost distant. "My first marriage was arranged by my parents when I was 22. Lady Catherine was beautiful, accomplished, everything a duchess should be. We were compatible, I suppose, fond of each other. But there was no passion, no deep connection. We did our duty, produced an heir, Isabella, and lived parallel lives within the same house." He paused, his expression growing pained. "Catherine died in childbirth with our second child, who didn't survive either. I blamed myself for her death, for not being able to save her, for not loving her the way she deserved. I swore I would never again enter into a marriage based solely on duty and obligation." "But you agreed to marry me," Helena pointed out gently. "I was unconscious," Alexander said with a wry smile. "The decision was made by my solicitors and family to protect Isabella. But now I find myself with an unexpected opportunity. a chance to discover what marriage might be like with someone I actually choose, someone who chooses me in return. You don't know me, Helena protested. I could be terrible, shrewish or boring or... You married a man in a coma to protect a child you'd never met, Alexander interrupted. You kissed me with such tenderness that it somehow reached through whatever darkness held me and brought me back to consciousness. You speak to Isabella with genuine kindness, and you answer my questions with an honesty that most people in your position would never dare. I may not know everything about you, Helena, but I know enough to want to learn more. Helena felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. Alexander, Don't answer now, he said gently. Take time to think about what you want. There's no pressure, no obligation beyond what you choose to accept. They finished their dinner in comfortable conversation, discussing books, music, and their shared love of the countryside. Helena found herself charmed by Alexander's intelligence and wit, by the way he listened to her opinions as though they mattered, by the genuine interest he showed in her thoughts and feelings. As the evening drew to a close, Alexander walked her to her chambers, a beautiful suite that connected to his own through a door that remained diplomatically closed. Thank you, Helena said, as they paused outside her door. For dinner, for the choice you've given me, for everything. Thank you, Alexander replied, for bringing me back to life. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender that Helena felt her heart flutter. Then he stepped back, his blue eyes warm with promise. Good night, Helena. Sweet dreams. As Helena prepared for bed, her mind raced with everything that had transpired. This morning she had been a desperate woman accepting an impossible marriage. Tonight she was a duchess being courted by her own husband, offered a choice she had never expected to have. The question was, what did she want? As she lay in the massive four-poster bed, staring up at the canopy, Helena realized that for the first time in years, she had the luxury of choosing her own future. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. But one thing was certain. The sleeping duke she had married was gone forever, replaced by a man whose very presence made her pulse race, and whose kiss had awakened something in her she was only beginning to understand. The question now was whether she had the courage to explore where that awakening might lead. The choice. Helena woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the tall windows of her chamber, and the sound of Isabella's laughter drifting up from the gardens below. She moved to the window and saw the little girl playing with a small spaniel, while Alexander watched from a nearby bench, his face relaxed and happy in a way that transformed his entire countenance. The sight made Helena's heart clench with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Here was a man who had been given a second chance at life, at happiness, at love, and somehow, impossibly, he was offering to share that second chance with her. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her lady's maid. Instead, Isabella peeked around the door, her face bright with excitement. "Good morning, Lady Helena. Papa said I could invite you to join us for breakfast if you'd like. We're eating in the morning room because it has the best view of the gardens." "That sounds lovely, sweetheart. Give me a few minutes to dress and I'll be right down." "Wonderful. Papa has been telling me all about his dreams while he was sleeping. He says he dreamed about you sometimes, even before he met you. Isn't that romantic?" Helena felt her cheeks warm. "Did he indeed?" "Oh yes. He said he dreamed about a lady with kind eyes and a gentle voice who would help take care of us." "And then you came, and you do have kind eyes, and you woke him up with true love's kiss just like in the fairy tales." Before Helena could respond to this fanciful interpretation of events, Isabella skipped away, leaving Helena to contemplate the child's words. Dreams about her before they met? It seemed impossible, yet there had been something almost mystical about that moment in the chapel, when their lips touched, and he awakened. She dressed carefully in a morning gown of soft green silk that brought out the color of her eyes, then made her way downstairs to the morning room. She found Alexander and Isabella already seated at a small table by the windows, engaged in animated conversation about the estate's horses. "Good morning," Alexander said, rising as she entered. The simple courtesy made her pulse quicken. When had a man last stood for her entrance into a room? "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you." Helena took the chair he held for her, acutely aware of his nearness as he helped seat her. "Isabella tells me you've been sharing your dreams with her." Alexander's eyes met hers over Isabella's head, and she saw a flicker of something, embarrassment perhaps, or vulnerability. "Isabella has a romantic imagination. She's been reading too many fairy tales." But Papa, you did say you dreamed about a lady who would help us, Isabella protested. And Lady Helena did help us. She married you when you were sleeping, and she woke you up, and now we're a family. Isabella, Alexander said gently, Lady Helena and I are still getting to know each other. We mustn't assume— It's all right, Helena interrupted, touched by the child's innocent faith in happy endings. Isabella, would you like to show me the gardens after breakfast? I'd love to see more of the estate. Oh yes, there's a maze, and a rose garden, and a lake with swans. Papa, will you come too? I have some estate business to attend to this morning, Alexander said, though his eyes remained on Helena. But perhaps this afternoon we could all ride out together, if Lady Helena enjoys riding. I do, Helena said, surprised by the invitation. Though I should warn you, I'm not an accomplished horsewoman. My guardian could only afford to keep one elderly mare. We have several gentle mounts that would suit you perfectly, Alexander assured her. I'd like to show you the estate. It's quite beautiful this time of year. After breakfast, Helena spent a delightful morning exploring the gardens with Isabella as her enthusiastic guide. The child chatted constantly, sharing stories about her father, her governess, her favorite hiding spots in the castle, and her dreams for the future now that her papa was awake. I was so scared he would never wake up, Isabella confided as they sat by the lake, watching the swans glide across the water. The physician said there was no hope, but I kept reading to him anyway. I thought maybe if I talked enough, he would hear me and come back. I'm sure he heard you, Helena said softly. Love has a way of reaching people even when they seem far away. Do you love Papa? Isabella asked, with the directness of childhood. Helena felt her breath catch. It was a question she had been avoiding, even in her own thoughts. Did she love Alexander? She barely knew him, yet there was something about him that drew her like a moth to flame. The way he looked at her, the gentleness in his touch, the respect he showed for her choices, it all combined to create feelings she had never experienced before. I think I could, Helena said honestly, if he wanted me to. He does, Isabella said with absolute certainty. I can tell by the way he looks at you. It's the same way he looks at me, but different, like you're precious, and he wants to keep you safe. That afternoon, true to his word, Alexander arranged for their ride around the estate. Helena was mounted on a gentle bay mare who responded beautifully to her inexperienced handling, while Alexander rode a magnificent black stallion that seemed to dance beneath him. Isabella, an accomplished rider despite her young age, kept pace on her own pony. As they rode through the parkland, Alexander pointed out various features of the estate: the home farm, the tenant cottages, the ancient oak grove where his ancestors had once held court. His pride in the land was evident, but so was his genuine care for the people who lived and worked there. The estate supports nearly 200 families, he explained, as they paused on a hill overlooking the valley. It's a responsibility I take very seriously. Every decision I make affects their livelihoods, their futures. It must be overwhelming at times, Helena observed. It can be, especially now after being away for so long. There are decisions that have been delayed, improvements that need to be made, problems that require attention. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It would be easier with a partner, someone to share the burden and the joy of it. Helena felt her heart skip at the implication in his words. You're asking me to stay. I'm asking you to consider it. Not out of duty or obligation, but because you want to, because you think we might build something worthwhile together. Before Helena could respond, Isabella called out from where she had ridden ahead. Papa, Lady Helena, come see the foals. They rode down to join her at a paddock, where several mares grazed with their young foals. The sight of the babies, all legs and curiosity, brought smiles to all their faces. They're beautiful, Helena breathed, watching a particularly bold foal approach the fence. New life, Alexander said softly, his eyes on her rather than the horses. New beginnings. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most unexpected circumstances. Helena turned to meet his gaze, and in that moment, she knew her answer. This man, this place, this child who had already claimed a piece of her heart, they represented everything she had never dared to hope for. A home, a family, a love that was real and deep and true. Alexander, she said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. I've made my decision. His expression grew intent, hopeful but guarded. And I want to stay. I want to try to build something real with you, if you'll have me. The smile that spread across Alexander's face was radiant, transforming his entire countenance. Without hesitation, he dismounted and moved to help her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist as he set her on the ground. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Helena replied. Alexander cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "Then let me court you properly, Helena. Let me show you what our life together could be." When he kissed her this time, it was with a passion and promise that made Helena's knees weak. This was no gentle awakening kiss, but the kiss of a man claiming his bride, of a woman choosing her future. "Hooray!" Isabella's voice broke through their embrace, and they turned to see the child clapping her hands in delight. "Now we really are a family!" As Alexander wrapped his arms around both Helena and Isabella, drawing them close against his chest, Helena realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. She had come to Thornbridge Castle expecting to marry a sleeping stranger and live a half-life of duty and obligation. Instead, she had awakened a duke with her kiss and discovered a love that was deeper and truer than any fairy tale. The sleeping beauty in this story hadn't been the duke at all. It had been her own heart, waiting for the right man to bring it to life. And as they stood together in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by the beauty of the estate that would be their home, Helena knew that their love story was just beginning. 1 year later, the first anniversary of their wedding was celebrated not with the somber ceremony that had marked their original union, but with a joyous renewal of vows in the castle's chapel. This time, the groom was very much awake, his blue eyes bright with love as he gazed at his bride. This time, the chapel was filled with friends and family, with laughter and music and the promise of a future built on genuine affection. Helena stood in the same spot where she had kissed her unconscious husband a year before, but everything else had changed. She wore a gown of ivory silk embroidered with silver threads, her auburn hair crowned with a wreath of white roses from the castle gardens. But it was the radiance in her green eyes that truly transformed her, the glow of a woman deeply loved and loving in return. 1 year ago, Alexander said, as they exchanged new rings, bands of gold engraved with words of love rather than mere legal obligation, "You gave me the greatest gift imaginable. You gave me life, love, and a future I had never dared to dream of." "And you gave me a home," Helena replied, her voice steady despite the tears of joy in her eyes. "A family, and a love that grows stronger every day." Isabella, now 8 and glowing with happiness, served as their witness. Her small hands clasped together as she watched her beloved father and stepmother pledge their hearts to each other once more. The year had been filled with discoveries and adjustments, with the gradual building of trust and intimacy between two people learning to love. Alexander had courted Helena with a patience and tenderness that had gradually worn down all her defenses, while Helena had brought warmth and laughter back to the castle that had been too quiet for too long. They had faced challenges, of course. Alexander's recovery had not been without setbacks, periods of fatigue and headaches that reminded them both how close they had come to losing each other before they had even truly found one another. Helena had struggled with the responsibilities of being a duchess, learning to manage a great household and navigate the complex social obligations of their position. But they had faced everything together, as partners in the truest sense of the word. Helena had proven to have a natural aptitude for estate management, her fresh perspective leading to innovations that improved both the profitability of the land and the lives of the tenants. Alexander had discovered in her not just a wife, but a true companion, someone who shared his vision for the future and supported his dreams. And now, as they celebrated their first anniversary, they had even more reason for joy. "There's something else we want to share with you all," Helena said, as the celebration moved to the great hall for the wedding breakfast. She exchanged a meaningful glance with Alexander, who smiled and nodded encouragingly. "Isabella," Alexander said, drawing his daughter close, "how would you feel about becoming a big sister?" The child's eyes widened with delight before she let out a squeal of joy that echoed through the hall. "Really? Truly? I'm going to have a baby brother or sister?" "In about 6 months," Helena confirmed, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "We wanted you to be the first to know." Isabella threw her arms around both of them, her happiness infectious. "This is the best day ever. First Papa woke up, then you became my mama, and now we're having a baby." The assembled guests erupted in congratulations and well wishes, but Helena found herself focused entirely on Alexander's face. The wonder and joy she saw there made her heart swell with love. This man who had once been trapped in endless sleep was now fully, vibrantly alive, embracing every moment of happiness life offered. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and Isabella had finally been convinced to go to bed, Helena and Alexander found themselves alone in their private sitting room. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the comfortable furniture they had chosen together, a far cry from the formal, museum-like atmosphere that had once characterized the castle. "Are you happy?" Alexander asked, pulling Helena into his arms as they settled on the sofa before the fire. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Helena replied, nestling against his chest. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real, that we're real." "I know what you mean," Alexander murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "There are still mornings when I wake up and expect to find myself back in that darkness, trapped in sleep. But then I see you beside me, and I know I'm truly alive. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't kissed you that day?" Helena asked softly. "Every day," Alexander admitted. "The physicians still can't explain my recovery. They speak of medical mysteries and unprecedented cases, but I know the truth. It was you, Helena. Your touch, your kiss, your love. Somehow, it reached through whatever held me captive and brought me back." "Perhaps it was simply time," Helena suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. "No," Alexander said firmly, tilting her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "I was lost, Helena, truly lost. I could hear voices sometimes, feel presences around me, but I couldn't respond, couldn't break through. But when your lips touched mine, when I felt the love and hope in that kiss, it was like a lifeline thrown into the darkness." Helena felt tears prick at her eyes. "I was so frightened that day. I had no idea what I was doing, marrying a stranger, kissing a man who couldn't even know I existed. But you did it anyway. You took that leap of faith, and it changed everything." Alexander's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. "You saved me, Helena. In every way a person can be saved. And you saved me too," Helena whispered. "You gave me a home, a purpose, a love I never thought I deserved." Their kiss was tender, full of the deep affection that had grown between them over the past year. When they broke apart, Alexander rested his forehead against hers, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you," he said simply, "more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You and Isabella and this new life we're creating together. You're my whole world." "I love you too," Helena replied. "So much that sometimes it frightens me. I never knew love could be this powerful, this all-consuming." "Don't be frightened," Alexander murmured. "We have a lifetime to explore this love, to let it grow and deepen. We have children to raise, an estate to manage, a future to build together." As if summoned by his words, a soft knock came at the door. Isabella peeked in, her hair in braids and her nightgown pristine. "I couldn't sleep," she said apologetically. "I keep thinking about the baby. Do you think it will be a boy or a girl?" Helena and Alexander exchanged amused glances. "Come here, sweetheart," Helena said, patting the sofa beside her. "We don't know yet, but does it matter?" Isabella curled up between them, her head on Helena's shoulder. "Not really. I'll love it either way. I just hope it looks like both of you, so everyone will know we're a real family." "We're already a real family," Alexander said gently. "Love makes a family, not blood." "I know," Isabella said with a yawn, "but it will be nice to have a baby that's part you and part Mama Helena, like a little piece of your love story." Helena felt her heart melt at the child's innocent wisdom. "That's a beautiful way to think about it, Isabella." As they sat together by the fire, the three of them, soon to be four, Helena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been a desperate woman with no choices, forced into a marriage that seemed more like a death sentence than a new beginning. Now she was surrounded by love, carrying the child of a man who cherished her, stepmother to a daughter who had claimed her heart completely. The castle that had once seemed cold and forbidding had become a true home, filled with laughter and warmth and the promise of future generations. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked softly, noticing her distant expression. "Fairy tales," Helena said with a smile. "How they always end with, 'and they lived happily ever after,' as though happiness is a destination rather than a journey." "And what have you concluded?" Alexander prompted. "That happiness isn't an ending, It's a choice we make every day, a commitment to love each other through whatever comes, to build something beautiful together despite the challenges. Very wise, Alexander murmured, and very true. Our story didn't end when I woke up, or when we renewed our vows, or even when we learned about the baby. It's still being written, one day at a time. Isabella had fallen asleep between them, her breathing soft and even. Alexander carefully lifted her in his arms, preparing to carry her to her chamber. "I'll be right back," he whispered to Helena, who nodded and remained by the fire, her hands resting on her stomach where their child grew. When Alexander returned, he found Helena staring into the flames, a peaceful expression on her face. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her once more. "I was thinking about that first night when you asked me what I wanted. I was so frightened then, so uncertain about everything. I couldn't imagine a future beyond mere survival. And now? Now I can see our whole life stretching ahead of us. Our children growing up in this castle, learning to ride and read and love. Christmases by this very fireplace with grandchildren playing at our feet. Growing old together, sharing memories and dreams and quiet moments like this one." Alexander took her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "It sounds perfect." "It won't always be perfect," Helena said realistically. "There will be challenges, disagreements, sorrows, as well as joys. But we'll face them together." "Together," Alexander agreed. "Always together." As the fire burned low and the castle settled into peaceful silence around them, Helena marveled at the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Thornbridge Castle expecting to marry a sleeping man and live a half-life of duty and obligation. Instead, she had awakened a duke with her kiss and discovered a love that was deeper and truer than any fairy tale. But more than that, she had awakened her own heart, learning to hope and dream and love with an intensity she had never imagined possible. The sleeping beauty in their story hadn't been Alexander at all. It had been Helena herself, waiting for the right moment, the right man, the right kiss to bring her fully to life. And as Alexander carried her to their bedchamber, as they settled into the bed they shared as husband and wife in every sense of the word, Helena knew that their love story was far from over. It was still being written, one kiss at a time, one day at a time, one moment of perfect happiness at a time. The Duke, who had slept for months, was now fully awake, embracing life with a passion that made every day an adventure. The woman who had married him out of desperation had become a duchess in her own right, not through title, but through the depth of her love and the strength of her character. And their child, growing beneath Helena's heart, would be born into a world of love and security, raised by parents who understood that the greatest magic wasn't in fairy tale kisses that awakened sleeping princes, but in the daily choice to love, honor, and cherish each other through all the seasons of life. As sleep claimed them both, wrapped in each other's arms, the castle stood sentinel around them, no longer a place of shadows and sorrow, but a home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of generations yet to come. Their love story had begun with an impossible marriage and a miraculous awakening. But the true magic lay not in that first kiss, but in all the kisses that followed, each one a renewal of their vows, a celebration of their love, and a promise that their happily ever after was not an ending, but a beautiful beginning that would last for all their days. The Duke had awakened from his coma to find himself married to a stranger. But in learning to love Helena, he had discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages, and that true love has the power not just to awaken sleeping hearts, but to transform two separate lives into one extraordinary story of hope, healing, and happily ever after. Did this magical tale of an impossible marriage and miraculous awakening capture your heart? If Alexander and Helena's journey from a comatose wedding to true love moved you, please like this story and subscribe for more enchanting historical romances. Share this with someone who believes in the power of love to work miracles and awaken sleeping hearts. Which moment touched you most? The wedding kiss that awakened the Duke, their first real conversation, or the beautiful family they created together? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit the notification bell for more romantic adventures where fairy tale magic meets real love and impossible situations become the foundation for extraordinary happiness.